المرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وجعلناهم أئمة يهدون بأمرنا وأوحينا إليهم فعل الخيرات وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وكانوا لنا عابدين. For the love of Imam JAFAR ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. The 25th of Shawwal marks the martyrdom anniversary of the 6th Imam of Ahlul Bayt, Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi salam, who passed away in the year 148 after Hijrah, being poisoned by Al-Mansur Al-Abbasi, the Abbasi Caliph. The Imam alayhi salam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, we often hear his name more than the other Imams, other than Imam Ali and Imam al-Hussein. But Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, you always hear there's a hadith from Imam al-Sadiq. In this hadith from Imam al-Sadiq, we hear this name more than we hear the names of the other Imams. Why? What was the role? What was the impact Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam had on Islam, on Tashayyu', on Shi'ism, and on knowledge in general, the Islamic golden era? And why was it that Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam stands out while the other Imams did not have the opportunity? There are several reasons why we remember Imam Sadiq perhaps more than the other Imams. In the books of Hadith, for example, in the book of Al-Kafi by Al-Qazwini, you find that the majority of the narrations, the majority of the ahadith, they go back to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Why is that? Several reasons. One is that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, first of all, he is the longest living of the Imams other than Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-sharif. Imam Sadiq lived for 68 years. Now today, in our time, someone living 68 years, that's not long. But Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, in comparison to the other Imams, Amir al-Mu'mineen and Rasulullah, they lived up to 63. Imam al-Hussein in his 50s, 57. Imam al-Hasan, 47. Imam al-Jawad, 25. So the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt didn't live a very long life. However, they lived an impactful life. And this is what's important. It doesn't matter how long I live. What matters is how I live. Maybe someone lives for 40 years or 30 years, and their contributions to society are much better than someone who lives 80 years. So it's about the quality of life and not the quantity of life. But Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he lived a longer life, relatively speaking, than the other Imams. He was born in the year 80 after Hijrah, and he was martyred in the year 148 after Hijrah. So being that he lived a longer life, obviously this means he had longer time to educate people, to spread his knowledge. This is one. Another very important reason that Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam is mentioned more in the ahadith, that we have more knowledge from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, is because Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam lived between two eras. The Umayyad dynasty, the Umayyad government, Bani Umayyah, which began with Muawiyah, and then he brought his son Yazid, and then Muawiyah bin Yazid, and then Marwan, and then the sons of Marwan. It lasted all the way until the year 132 after Hijrah. The Umayyad government fell. The last of the Umayyad caliphs, his name was Marwan, and they call him Marwan al-Himar, Marwan the donkey, because he was waging war after war. He was so stubborn, waging war after war until his kingdom, it lost all of its power. And there were rebellions. Many rebellions started emerging. In fact, after the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein, rebellion started against Bani Umayyah. And during the time of Imam al-Sadiq, a family emerged. And this family, they were the cousins of the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. Bani al-Abbas, the sons of Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, from his progeny, they revolted and they brought down Bani Umayyah and they came to power. They came to power. And their slogan, when they came to power, they said, we want to bring the Rida from Al-Muhammad. We want to satisfy the family of the Prophets because they have been persecuted, they have been killed, they have been betrayed by the Ummah. And it wasn't only Imam al-Hussein that was killed. There were several massacres that took place. One of them was Zayd al-Shahid as well. Zayd, the son of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, the uncle of Imam al-Sadiq. He was also killed and butchered, and his body was crucified for 4 years. So there was so much corruption and so much oppression that took place during the time of Bani Umayyah, they ended up losing. And this is any oppression. Today, don't have the idea that if there's an oppressive government, they're going to last forever. Dhulm, oppression, does not last. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow it to last. Maybe some people, it looks like they're ruling with an iron fist. No one imagines that they could take rule from this person. But within one night, all power could go away. In the year 2003, Saddam, who you ask any Iraqi person, or you ask any person 1 year before that, 2002, you ask them, do you imagine Saddam losing power? They would say, never, of course not. Look how much power he has. He executed all of the scholars. He destroyed the houses. Millions of people were killed. Within one night, he lost all of his power. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not difficult. Bani Umayyah, they lost their power. Bani al-Abbas came up to power. So during that time, there were rebellions, the fall of one government and the rise of another government. Imam al-Baqir and his son, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, they saw the window of opportunity to educate people, to teach people. That's all that the Imams wanted. The Imams didn't want to come and assume a position of power and authority. They just wanted to spread the knowledge. وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. They guide by the order of Allah. During the time when Bani Umayyah had a very strong grip on power, the Ahlul Bayt didn't have the authority to speak. Imam al-Hussein, he spoke out, he was killed. Imam al-Hassan was poisoned. Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, he had to spread his knowledge, but he couldn't go up in the masjid and deliver a lecture. So how would he spread his knowledge? Through du'as. Du'a makarim al-akhlaq, teaching people akhlaq. Du'a Abu Hamza al-Thumali, the munajat, the du'as of the Ahlul Bayt teaches us how to speak to God. It teaches us how to deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It introduces us to God. That was his method. Then Imam al-Baqir comes, and Imam al-Baqir, he has more relative freedom. The father of Imam al-Sadiq, he would sit in the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, and he would teach, and there would be circles, groups of people gathering around the Imam. And these circles, they slowly started getting larger and larger and larger. Imam al-Sadiq was one of those students in those circles. He was sitting and learning from his father, Imam al-Baqir. Eventually, Imam al-Baqir passes away, and Imam al-Sadiq, he begins to teach, and he begins to establish the first university in Islam, where he educates people. And the education was not only on religion, the education was on various fields. This is why during the era of Imam al-Sadiq, it was during the Muslim golden era. Right now you could go look it up, the Muslim golden era. It was during that era that the Muslims, they started performing surgeries while Europe was in the dark ages. It was during that era that Muslims, within the Muslim government, which was very vast, someone writes a check. You write a check and you go, you receive money on the other side of the world. This now you have communication, you have ways of connecting. They say, okay, the money was received. They set up a system where you write here, over there you go the other part of the world and you receive your money. And there were many things that the Muslims were contributing to society. In fact, right now they come and they talk about Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato, these philosophers, Greek philosophers. How has their work come to us right now in the English language? It was from Greek, it was translated into Arabic. And from the Arabic language, then it was spread all over the world. So it was actually the Muslims that preserved these texts. They preserved these works of philosophers because the major universities in the world were in Baghdad and in Medina and in the Muslim parts of the world. So that was the contribution that Islam had and the Muslim community had, and Imam Sadiq played a vital role within that community. I mentioned Jabir ibn Hayyan, the father of modern day chemistry. He was a student of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. So Imam Sadiq didn't just teach Islam. He taught various fields, various subjects, geology, geography, the stars, and mathematics and anatomy and all of these. There's a scholar, it's a book out right now, you can find it in the English language as well. Tawheed al-Mufaddal. Tawheed al-Mufaddal. One of the companions of Imam Sadiq, his name is Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar. He says, I went to the masjid of the Prophet and I saw an atheist. In the masjid of the Prophet, he's telling people, don't believe in this and don't believe in that. And he says, I went to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, teach me how to reply back to this atheist. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he tells him, sit. His name is Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar. He tells him, sit. And Imam Sadiq gives him a lesson. But this lesson is not a lesson on ideology. This is a lesson on the human anatomy. The human anatomy. You want to learn about the human anatomy, the various systems within the body? Go and read Tawheed al-Mufaddal. 1400 years ago, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he teaches this man. So Imam Sadiq had many contributions. And his contributions were in several ways. One thing that made it different than others, what made Imam Sadiq different from the other scholars and teachers of the time? One, he insisted on his students to write down everything. Today, someone might come and say, how do I know this hadith is an authentic hadith from Imam Sadiq? This book, Al-Kafi, Man La Yahdaruhu Al-Faqih, Al-Istibsar, these books of hadith, how do I know that this is authentic? Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he was making sure that these texts and these words are preserved. And during the time of Imam Sadiq and Imam al-Baqir, there were students that would write down in their notebooks. They wrote down everything. Some of them, they wrote down a whole chapter on Salah. One of them, a companion of Imam Sadiq, his name is Hariz. He writes down a whole book on the Salah. Another one, Zurara, he's a faqih. Another one, Hisham ibn al-Hakam, he is on the ideology, on aqa'id, on so one person, Jabir ibn Hayyan, on chemistry. Each one had different subjects, and they would write down. So one, Imam Sadiq would tell his students to write them down, and there were books that were called Al-Usul al-Arba'mi'ah, the 400 original sources, primary sources. Today when we go to university, if you want to do research, they tell you you have to go to the primary source. These were the primary sources. These Usul al-Arba'mi'ah, they ended up becoming Al-Kafi, Man La Yahdarahu Al-Faqih, Al-Istibsar, and the books of the Shia today. They were passed down until Al-Kulayni, who during the time of the Ghaiba of Imam al-Mahdi, who wrote down the book Al-Kafi. So there's not that far of a distance. This is one. Imam Sadiq made his students write down. He tells them, Uktubu. If you don't write down, you will forget. Second, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam focused on various subjects. Right now, a khatib, a speaker, gets up on the minbar every day, it's one conversation. Imam Sadiq, he created specialists in different fields. So for example, Zurara and Muhammad ibn Muslim, they were fuqaha, they were faqih, they were scholars in fiqh. And Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and he has others who were focused on ideology, others who were focused on different subjects. And third, Imam Sadiq created scholars in that he would give them the explanation and the reasoning. So for example, right now we have a rule which is very beneficial to anyone who knows it right now. This is called al-istishab. Istishab. How many of you have heard this word, istishab? Istishab, it is a rule that is logical, common sense, and you could practice it every day in your life. What is istishab? Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he tells him, he lays down a foundation, a rule for anything that comes up later on. He tells his companion, لا تنقض اليقين بالشك وانقضه بيقين آخر. Meaning, if you have certainty in something, the certainty is valid, it is strong, and you do not negate that certainty with doubt. You do not remove that certainty with doubt, you remove it with another certainty. So where does this apply? Right now, I left the house, I had done wudu. Okay? I left the house with wudu. 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours later, I'm about to pray, and then I say, wait, do I have wudu? So then I go back to what I was certain about. I was certain that I did wudu before I left the house. Now, I doubt, I have shak that I lost my wudu. What weighs more, certainty or shak? Certainty weighs more. So therefore, I go back to my certainty. This rule could apply the other way around. I left the house, I know, or I was sleeping, I know I woke up, I didn't have wudu because I was sleeping. Did I do wudu or did I not do wudu? I would go back to what I was certain of, that I did not do wudu because I was sleeping before that. This is one rule that Imam Sadiq gives his companions. Today they call it istishab. You need it every day. You use it every day. And the Imam alayhi salam, another one. كُلُّ شَيْءٍ لَكَ طَاهِرٍ. He doesn't tell him this is tahir, this is najis, this is this and that. He gives him the ruling. كُلُّ شَيْءٍ لَكَ طَاهِرٍ حَتَّى تَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ نَجِسٌ. Everything by default is tahir, is pure. Unless you know it's najis. So for example, this table. Maybe I have never seen this table before. I came, I sat in a classroom, I sat in an office. I don't know, was this najis, was this tahir, can I rely on this? Here, the ruling is everything is tahir unless you know it's najis, unless you have seen najasa be on it. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, this was his contribution. This is how he taught his students, and this is how he taught his companions. And this is the role of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Now, you know, there were Imam Sadiq right now, the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt, our aqa'id, we are imami, meaning we follow Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and all the 12 imams. But our fiqh, what do they call the Shia? Ja'fari. Ja'fari. Just like the Sunnis, you have the aqa'id, the belief, they're following the Sunni Islam belief. However, when it comes to their fiqh, you have four madahib: the Hanafi, the Hanbali, the Shafi'i, and the Maliki. Our fiqh, 90%, 95% of it goes back to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. So now the question is, first of all, today within Sunni Islam, why is it that there's only four madahib? Why not 5? Why not 6? Why not 7? Why not 10? Why not 20? Is there, because right now there's an insistence amongst the non-Shia school of thought that there's 4 madahib. If you're out of these 4 madahib, then you're out of Islam. Is this somewhere in the Quran? No. Is there somewhere in the hadith that you have to follow Abu Hanifa or Shafi'i or Malik or Ahmad ibn Hanbal? It's not. So how did it come to be that there are only 4 madahib? And why was Imam al-Sadiq excluded from these madahib? The reason is that these madahib, if you read in history, immediately after the Prophet, during the time of the Khulafa, during the time of Imam al-Sadiq, about 100 years after, there was not just 4 madahib. In fact, they've counted over 100 madhab. Al-Awza'i has a madhab. Different scholars, people living in Kufa, a scholar living in Basra, a scholar living in Medina and Mecca, they had their own madhab. What does madhab mean? Madhab, dhihab, is the direction that they go. So madhab meaning people follow this person's direction. In fact, it was not just 4, but over the centuries, over the years, political influences removed all of the other madahib and they only raised these 4. They raised these 4. In fact, there's a school in Baghdad that was built by the Khalifa Al-Mustansir Al-Abbasi. He built Al-Mustansiriyah. I don't know if anyone of you have heard of the school, Al-Mustansiriyah. It's still right now in Baghdad. It was an old school built in around the year 600 Hijri. That school, it had 4 corners in it. And these 4 corners, they were allocated for Shafi'i, Hanbali, Hanafi, and Maliki. This was politically influenced to remove all other madahib. And one of the reasons why these schools of thought, like Abu Hanifa, for example, or like Malik, they were raised because, one, they were associated with the government. They had a political influence. And they were raised to bring down the madhab of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. To bring people away from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. But why does it make more sense to follow the madhab of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam? We say we have to follow the madhab of Imam al-Sadiq. Why? One is that Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam was the closest to the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Abu Hanifa was born in the same year as Imam al-Sadiq, year 80. But the others, Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Shafi'i and Malik, they came many decades. They came many years after Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. So wouldn't it make more sense to follow the one who's closer to the Prophet? So that immediately disqualifies 3 of them. Second, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq was not only close to Rasulullah in terms of age, but he was close to Rasulullah in terms of lineage. In terms of lineage. His family is directly connected to Imam Sadiq. This is why Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, when they ask him about his source of knowledge, he says, Hadithi, Hadith Abi. وحديث أبي حديث جدي وحديث جدي حديث الحسين وحديث الحسين حديث الحسن وحديث الحسن حديث أمير المؤمنين وحديث أمير المؤمنين حديث رسول الله وحديث رسول الله حديث الله. He says, my hadith is the hadith, I took it directly from my father, Imam al-Baqir, who took it from Zayn al-Abidin, who took it from Imam al-Hussein, who took it from Imam al-Hassan, who took it from Amir al-Mu'mineen, who took it from Rasulullah. So this is the shortest chain. Whereas the others, the tabi'een, they say, I heard from this person, who heard from this person. You don't know who's reliable, who's not reliable. But there's no question amongst Muslims. All Muslims, Sunni, Shia Muslims. You come and you ask them, is Imam al-Baqir, for example, na'udhu billah, a liar? Is Imam Zayn al-Abidin a liar? They'll tell you no. They're honest. So this is the most reliable chain. And Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he had that chain. The other madahib, for example, Abu Hanifa, didn't have access to the direct knowledge, to knowledge directly from Rasulullah, from the Imams of the Ahl Bayt. So they had to develop several mechanisms and several different ways to bring a new law. For example, Abu Hanifa, he started something called what? Qiyas. Qiyas. Analogy. Because he doesn't have the source of the knowledge of the hadith, so he says, okay, if, for example, if you need wudu in order to do tawaf, then that means you also need wudu to do sa'i as well. Because sa'i and tawaf, they are similar to one another. They're both acts of worship. But right now, do you need wudu in sa'i? You don't need wudu in sa'i. You only need wudu in tawaf. Because we have a hadith directly from the Prophet that comes and gives us the rule. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he tells Abu Hanifa used to live during the time of Imam al-Sadiq. Imam al-Sadiq, he tells him, Ya Aba Hanifa, la taqis. Do not do qiyas. Because shaitan was the first to do qiyas. Inna deen Allah la yuqas bil-uqul. You can't come and say, do analogy when it comes to the religion of God. There are certain things Allah wants. So Abu Hanifa would insist on doing qiyas. Imam Sadiq tells him, you can't do qiyas. He tells him, right now, if a person, what's more important? Imam Sadiq tells him, what's more important in the eyes of Allah, salah or fasting? He says, salah is more important. He tells him, then why does a lady in the month of Ramadan, if she broke her fast because of her cycle, she has to make up the fast, but she does not have to make up the prayer. If prayer is more important, if you want to do qiyas, then and if you have to make up the fasting, then you have to also make up the prayer as well. So Imam Sadiq comes and tells him, you can't do qiyas. You can't come and do intellectual analogies when it comes to religion, because the religion is ta'abbud from Allah. There are certain things God tells you have to do it this way. There's other things Allah tells you have to do it another way. So this was one of the things that emerged, because they didn't have access to the knowledge, so they had to do qiyas. Imam Malik, right now he has a famous book of hadith. It's called Muwatta Malik. Muwatta Malik. This book of hadith, Muwatta Malik, Al-Mansur al-Abbasi, the Abbasi Khalifa, he tells Malik, I want you to write down a book of rules, a book of laws, and we're going to force everyone to follow that. So what does this mean? This means that the other madahib, the other sects, they were politically backed. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam was not politically influenced. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he was not politically backed. And in fact, they raised those other scholars. They brought them, the khulafa, they brought them close to them. They gave them money. They empowered them just so that they can question Imam Sadiq and the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt and take away from the merits of the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And they promoted their madhab. They promoted their ways. While you see the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt, the path of the Ahlul Bayt has always been persecuted and fought against. But it has still survived to this day. And this is the hidayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will keep alive until the day of judgment. Now, my dear brothers and sisters, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he lived, yes, he lived the longest of the Imams that passed away. But does this mean that Imam Sadiq had a very easy life? No. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam was persecuted many times. And his followers and his Shia, they were persecuted many times. One of the closest people to him, Mu'alla ibn Khunais, he was beheaded and he was killed. And Imam, by the governor of Medina, who was from Bani al-Abbas. He kills the helper, the right-hand man of Imam Sadiq. And many of the companions of the Imams of the Ahl Bayt, especially Imam Sadiq, they were persecuted. This is why Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he taught his Shia how to coexist, how to survive the challenges of the time. You know, the Tashayyu' has survived so much. They tried to wipe out Tashayyu' many times. Every Khalifa that comes, they would try to wipe out Tashayyu'. On the day of Ashura, 18 from the family of Rasulullah were killed in one day. Then they came and they killed more and more. And anyone who shows signs of being a follower of the Ahl Bayt, they were persecuted. This is why the Imams alayhim salam, they taught people how to live amongst people, how to protect your values and protect your faith. And one of those ways was through taqiyya. What is taqiyya? Today some people have the idea that I only practice taqiyya to not hurt the feelings of another person. No, taqiyya is for your survival. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, At-taqiyyatu dini wa dinu abai. What is taqiyya? Taqiyya is exactly what Ammar ibn Yasir did. And Rasulullah told him it's okay that he did. Ammar ibn Yasir, the Sahabi of Rasulullah, him, Ammar, and his father Yasir and his mother Sumayya, they were Muslim. And they kept saying, Ahadun, Ahad. I only worship one God. I only worship one God. Yasir and Sumayya, they kept saying, Ahadun, Ahad, until they were killed. But Ammar, he was a faqih. Ammar, he knew. This is why Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says Ammar knew more than his father. Ammar, he hid his faith. Ammar, he hid the fact that he was a muwahhid, and that ended up saving his life. And then Ammar became the companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and he gave so much contributions to Islam and to the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. So Imam al-Sadiq, he taught his companions to not go out publicly and announce your faith at all times. Because sometimes if you do that, then you're going to kill yourself. And not only are you going to put yourself in danger, you're going to put others in danger, and you're going to wipe out the whole message that you're carrying. Right now, you are a carrier of the truth. So you have to make sure that you live as long as possible. You have to make sure that you pass it on to as many people as you can. If you risk your life and if you put your life in danger, then you're not only jeopardizing your own life, but you're jeopardizing the message that you're carrying with you. And Imam Sadiq, he taught his companions to not do that. This is one. Man la taqiyata lah la dina lah. At-taqiyatu dini wa dinu abai. Second, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he taught people that yes, even if you're a follower of the Ahl al-Bayt, you're a follower of the Ja'fari school of thought, but you have to carry the akhlaq of Islam. The akhlaq of Islam. Today some people, they get too excited because I'm from this school of thought, I'm from this madhab, and they end up doing certain things that brings a negative image to Islam and to Tashayyu' and to everything, religion altogether. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he gives his companions, كونوا دعاة لنا بغير ألسنتكم. Invite people to us without your tongues. What does that mean? That means through your actions. Through your actions, show people what Islam is. Show people the tashayyu' and the path of the Ahl al-Bayt. كونوا زينا لنا ولا تكونوا شيئا علينا. He says, be an adornment for us. Don't let people say, oh, look at the Ja'far, look at the students, look at the Shia, how they are. Today, there are some people in the world, through their actions, they push people away. No one wants to be associated with them because of their actions. And we have to make sure that we don't do that. And he would tell them, don't say, you're not a Shia just because you say you're a Shia. You're a Shia in your actions. You're a Shia in your salah. You're a Shia in your akhlaq. You're a Shi'i in your charity. This is what defines you as a Shi'i. This was one feature from the life of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. And there was another where Imam Sadiq alayhi salam was not afraid to say the word of the truth. He was not afraid to say the truth in front of the tyrants. One day, Al-Mansur al-Abbasi, he asks the Imam, he tells him, why did God create the fly? He was upset. You know, you become so rich, you become so powerful that you get upset as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the fly. So the Imam alayhi salam, he tells him, لِيُذِلَّ بِهِ أُنُوفِ الْجَبَابِرَةِ, to bring down, to humiliate those who think that they are above anyone else. A fly comes and sits on your nose, it humiliates you. So he tells him, لِيُذِلَّ بِهِ أُنُوفَ الْجَبَابِرَةِ. Another time, Al-Mansur, he calls the Imam. Several times he would summon the Imam. Sometimes in the middle of the night, he would send his soldiers, his guards, go and bring me JAFAR al-Sadiq, just to abuse and harass the Imam. In fact, multiple times, he would bring the Imam and he swears he wants to kill the Imam. And then the Imam recites a dua. The Imam does something and he ends up bringing him away. One of the narrators, he says, one day in the middle of the night, Al-Mansur, he was swearing. He said, Wallah, Wallah, I'm going to kill him. And he had his swordmen ready. He said, as soon as he comes, you kill him. You strike him on his head. He said they went and they jumped over the roof of the house and they brought out Imam Sadiq alayhi salam in the middle of the night. They see him praying and they come and they drag him out. That narrator, he says, I saw the Imam, his mouth was moving. His mouth was moving. He said as soon as Al-Mansur saw him, he came and he hugged him and everything changed altogether. The Imam alayhi salam had recited a dua. So the Khalifa, even though the Khalifa was in power, but the Khalifa was very insecure. And this is always the people of injustice, they're always insecure. Why else? Why would they kill? Why would they oppress? One time, Al-Mansur, he calls Imam al-Sadiq and he tells him, لِمَاذَا لَا تَزُورَنَا كَمَا يَزُورَنَا النَّاسِ. Why don't you come and run after us? Why don't you come and stand at our doors like everyone else? They come and they beg to be at the doors of the kings and the doors of the rulers. The Imam alayhi salam, he says, لَيْسَ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِ الدُّنْيَا مَا نَخَافُكَ عَلَيْهِ. He says, I don't have anything in this dunya that I'm competing with you for. You want the dunya, go take the dunya. People, they think the Imams of the Ahl Bayt were after power. Even Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he rebelled against Yazid not for the sake of power, just to let people know 1400 years that Yazid was in the wrong, that I did not give legitimacy to a man like Yazid. The Ahl Bayt, they were never after power. Imam Ali, if he wanted power, he could have gotten power. The Ahl Bayt were not after power. He says, لَيْسَ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِ الدُّنْيَا مَا نَخَافُكَ عَلَيْهِ وَلَا عِنْدَكَ مِنْ أَمْرِ الْآخِرَةِ مَا نَرْجُوهُ مِنْكَ. And you don't have anything in the akhirah that we should come and learn and take from you. If you were someone who was God conscious, if you were someone who you're going to teach us how to get closer to Allah, then we would come to you and learn from you. But you don't have any of that for the akhirah. And then he says, وَلَا أَنْتَ فِي نِعْمَةٍ فَنُهَنِّئَكَ بِهَا. And you're not in a state of ni'mah to come and congratulate you for. Even though he's the Khalifa, he has power, he has authority, tells him you're not in a ni'mah. And this is a major lesson that Imam Sadiq teaches us. Just because I have money, just because I have wealth, just because I have authority, that does not really mean I'm in a ni'mah, I'm in a blessing. That's just a bigger test for me. That's just more things that I'm going to be audited and accountable for on the Day of Judgment. And then he tells him, وَلَا فِي نِقْمَةٍ فَنُعَزِّيكَ. And you don't have someone that died in your family that we come and we give you condolences. فَقَالَ الْمَنْصُورِ, he tells him, تَصْحَبُنَا لِتَنْصَحَنَا. Be with us so that you could give us advice. He says, come and sit with me, sit in my gathering so that you could give me advice. فَأَجَابَهُ الْإِمَامِ مَنْ أَرَادَ الدُّنْيَا لَا يَنْصَحَكَ وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْآخِرَ لَا يَصْحَبَكَ. The one who wants the dunya does not spend time with you because you kill everyone who's around you. The Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, the man who brought them, the general who brought them to power, they killed him. Anyone who was with them, they would wipe them out as soon as they feel a sense of insecurity from them. And second, وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْآخِرَةِ لَا يَصْحَبَكَ. And whoever wants the akhirah doesn't spend time with someone like you. Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam was persecuted. One of the companions, he says, I wanted to ask Imam Al-Sadiq a question, but the house was filled with guards and spies. This is mentioned in Al-Kafi. He says, I saw a person selling cucumbers, a cart with cucumbers. He said, I had a really important question I needed to ask Imam Sadiq. He said, I bought the whole cart from that man. And I tell him, give me your clothes. He says, I go with the clothes of the cucumber just to get near the house of the Imam. And then I asked the person at the door. He went and he got me the answer and came back. Look how difficult it came to reach the house of Imam JAFAR al-Sadiq alayhi salam. One time, the Khalifa ordered for the house of Imam al-Sadiq to be lit on fire. They threw the fire in the house of Imam JAFAR al-Sadiq alayhi salam. In the middle of the night or during the day, they come and with their guards, they throw the fire in the house of the Imam. And when a house is lit on fire, the kids and the children and the women, they start running around to protect themselves, to protect their life. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, his companions, they come and they help him extinguish the fire. And Imam al-Sadiq started walking through the fire. The hadith says, he walks through the fire and he says, أَنَا ابْنُ أَعْرَاقِ الثَّرَى أَنَا ابْنُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلِ اللَّهِ. I am the son of Ibrahim who was thrown in the fire. And he manages to save his life and protect his children. Then Imam al-Sadiq, he sits in the walkway, he sits on the ground and he begins to cry. So his companions, they come and they tell him, Ya Aba Abdullah, why are you crying? If it's about belongings, then Allah will give you back everything that you lost. This is not the first time the house of the Ahl al-Bayt has been lit on fire. The house of your grandmother Fatima was also lit on fire. So don't cry. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he tells them, I am not crying for myself. I am not crying for my belongings. But when they lit the house on fire, I saw my women and my children run in the walkway while the fire had caught on their clothes. And this reminded me of the women and the children of my grandfather Abu Abdullah al-Hussein when the fire was thrown on the tent of Abu Abdullah. And the caller called out, أحرقوا بيوت الظالمين. Burn the homes of the oppressors. And they came after beheading my grandfather Abu Abdullah. They threw the fire, and the fire caught on to the tent, and it caught on to the abaya, the clothes of the women and the children. This is why I cry. You see, Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, even during that difficult moment, he remembers Imam al-Hussein and the masa'ib of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Yes, this is the family that has faced all of the oppression and aggression. The house of Imam al-Sadiq was lit on fire. The tents of Abu Abdullah were lit on fire. And the door of Fatima al-Zahra was also lit on fire. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Al-Ali al-Azim. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Let us raise our hands in dua by the love and honor of Imam JAFAR al-Sadiq alayhi salam, whose grave has been destroyed. Over 100 years, the grave of Imam al-Sadiq has been in ruins, and no one is allowed to visit this great scholar, this great Imam, he along with the other Imams in Baqi'. We ask Allah to grant us the shafa'ah and the ziyarah of Imam JAFAR al-Sadiq alayhi salam. نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات، تابع اللهم بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات، إنك مجيب الدعوات، إنك غافر الخطيئات، إنك على كل شيء قدير. And for the souls of all of your marhumin, and a Fatiha, a special Fatiha for the parents of our dear sister Aziza, Dr. Aziza Al-Askari, her father Sayyid Askari Zaki Musawi, and Malika Musawi, who it is close to her 1 year, it just passed her 1 year anniversary. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shower their souls with His mercy and His blessings, and we ask you all to recite Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha. اللهم صل على محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب